Generally speaking, the gaming industry is a lot better these days at ensuring games and consoles from all over the world are shared with everyone, instead of games being locked to specific regions. But that wasn't always the case, with the PS2 in particular boasting many games that were available in Japan but not the rest of the world. Hello viewers, it's good to see you. I'm Will from Cultured Vultures. I've been to Japan, you know, and these are 10 banger PS2 games that never left the country. Now friends, while I have been to Japan at least twice, there are some Japanese words that I cannot say very well. There are many in fact. If I'm saying them wrong, then why not let me know in the comments down below in a perfectly level-headed and reasonable way. Keizuki Itagaka might be more celebrated these days thanks to a large resurgence of popularity in Baki the Grappler series. Thank you Netflix, bring back Santa Clarita Diet while you're at it, you cowards. But Baki isn't the only martial arts property that Itagaka has worked on. In between writing and illustrating for the Baki manga in the 90s, Itagaka also worked on a manga adaptation of Garoden, a series of martial arts novels written by Baku Unimakura. While it wasn't the first Garoden adaptation, it was the most successful, running for 14 years and spawning both prequel manga and 2 PS2 games. The best one being Garoden Break Blow, Fist or Twist. I'm not sure if it's threatening me with a good time or a very good time, but either way, I'm down. As you'd expect from a manga adaptation, Garoden Break Blow Fist or Twist includes a few dozen characters from the series, along with a story mode that allows you to revisit key moments and fights. The gameplay features a mix of striking and grappling, similar to early UFC games, but the real winning gimmick is the momentum system, which forces players to stay on the offensive in order to secure wins. Players only unlock their supers when they're on the back foot though, allowing fights to have epic swings back and forth. Throw in the fact that Baki's dad, Yujiro Hanma, is included as a secret unlockable character, and you've got the basics here for a theoretical Baki fighting game. Coming never to Netflix games, probably. The Tales of Destiny section of the Tales of series is pretty weird, at least in terms of releases and localization. The first game launched on the PS1 in Japan and North America, but the sequel, which launched on the PS2 in 2002, never made it outside of Japan. There was Tales of Destiny 2 that did launch in North America on the PS1 in 2001, but that was actually known as Tales of Eternia in other regions. If that's not weird enough for you, the first Tales of Destiny game was remade for the PS2 in 2006, which was also not released outside of Japan. Only for Namco Bandai to follow it up 2 years later with a director's cut that featured even more content. Tales of Destiny follows a young adventurer Stan, who manages to find a talking sword and becomes embroiled in a battle for ancient and powerful artifacts. The remake version featured fully 3D environments, redrawn sprites for every character, and full voice acting for the key cutscenes, while the director's cut added a mode to see events from another character's perspective, amongst other things. The PS2 versions also included Active Party Window, where players would interact with each other during the adventure, something that's become a staple of the Tales of series, with Tales of the Arise being perhaps the most popular entry in the series, and Bandai releasing remasters of games like Vesperia and Symphonia. Maybe it's time now to see the PS2 version of Tales of Destiny and its sequel released from Region Lock Jail. SNK are mostly known for their fighting game work, like King of Fighters, Garou and Samurai Showdown. But their incredible shoot-'em-up series Metal Slug should never be overlooked, a series as brutally hard as Contra, but with 200% more comedy, whimsy and silly shenanigans. Metal Slug remains an incredibly popular part of SNK's library of titles. Even the strategy spin-off Metal Slug Tactics is perhaps one of the most anticipated games on the horizon at the time of writing. With notoriety like that, SNK naturally decided they'd give a 3D version of Metal Slug a whirl. And the results were, well, they weren't that great actually. But well, we can't have it, so we want it and have to have it. It's like that Looney Tunes movie that was probably actually terrible. The aptly named Metal Slug 3D transitioned the shoot 'em up gameplay into the third dimension, which reduced a lot of the traditional difficulty that you saw in the 2D Metal Slug games. But the end result was a series of poor reviews, and SNK reconsidered releasing Metal Slug 3D in the West. Despite that, the majority of Metal Slug 3D features English text and voice acting. So if you can manage to get hold of a copy, or more likely sail the high seas to obtain a copy, you should be able to enjoy Metal Slug 3D without having to deal with that psychotic Duolingo bird. You might think that Square Enix titles like Kingdom Hearts and Nier are a bit too ridiculous when it comes to spreading their stories across multiple outlets like mobile games, anime, and in case of Nier, an actual orchestra performance. It's become a bit of a Square Enix tradition over the years, but certainly it's not the first time it has happened, as one multimedia experiment that never made it outside of Japan was the Code Age franchise, which consisted of a mobile game, a manga series, and the subject of this list, the action RPG codename Commanders Sugu Mono Sugeru Mono. Conceptually, Code Ages, and thank you writer for not making me say that again, is a lot to wrap your head around. With the setting based in a world that looks like a Dyson sphere, multiple factions at war with one another, and enemy creatures called Othellos that can give people strange powers and mutations. Oh, and the whole world is under the threat of annihilation. Anyway, Code Age Commanders follows the perspective of 4 different characters, each with their own perspectives and motivations. The game was decently well received, but because Code Ages was never released outside of Japan, it has fallen into relative obscurity in the years since. At least the ideas have lived on in Square Enix's other franchises. Some of the most common game types that were never released outside of Japan are the fighting games, with the majority of those games falling under the category of kusoge. And if you're wondering what kusoge means, think stinky doo-doo games and you're about there. The games are often characterized by having busted mechanics, easy to perform infinites, and exploitable bugs. While it sounds like a derisory term, kusoge games are generally treated with genuine love and affection, as the sheer lunacy is often a stark contrast to the constant nerfs, buffs, and focus on competitive integrity that modern competitive fighting games have to deal with. All of this is to say that there is a king of kusoge, Hokuto no Ken, known in the West as Fist of the North Star. The 2005 fighting game from Sega and Arc System Works was originally released in arcades, which did make their way over to North America. But the PS2 port was never released outside of Japan. This lack of accessibility has led Fist of the North Star to become somewhat of an underground legend in the fighting game scene, until videos started to emerge of ridiculous combos for every character that resembled a basketball being dribbled by the Harlem Globetrotters. They still a thing? Seriously, the combos are so ridiculous that during a tournament, one player tried to bribe another player into dropping their combo. The West truly missed out when Fist of the North Star did not get a PS2 release. The byword on anime and manga about dudes driving cars fast and doing sick drifts. Initial D has become more popular and widely recognizable as the years have gone by. Perhaps that's aided by the fact that songs like Deja Vu and Gas Gas Gaps are absolute bangers and have been memed to death all over the internet. But the point still remains. Sega were easily able to create a series of arcade games based upon the franchise, but with most of those seeing a release in Japan and other regions. But the 3 console ports that have been made, Special Stage PS2, Street Stage PSP, and Extreme Stage PS3, were never released outside of Asia. Based on the initial D Arcade Stage version 2 release, Special Stage for the PS2 retained much of the same features and content as the arcade release, though one more mode called Bunter's Challenge was removed in the overall package. Despite that, the PS2 release included a brand new story mode not seen in the arcades, which allowed players to experience moments from the manga up to Volume 25. It was the first home console release for the initial D series, and Special Stage definitely set the bar in terms of what an anime game should offer its fans, though the graphical downgrade from arcade to PS2 wasn't exactly the best. Gets more than a D though. The PS2 and its console generation as a whole was really on the frontier of a genre we'd like to refer to as cool dude does badass shit, usually with a massive sword, with Onimusha and Devil May Cry being two of the most notable examples. In fairness, most games that followed the pattern tended to originate from Japan, so it's no surprise that Japan had a few extra games that we in the West weren't privy to. One such game is Chain Dive, which, you know, fits into this genre because its main character is called Shark. That's it. Sold. We'll take 10 dozen copies if anyone decides to remaster and localize this one, thanks. Sony did publish it as well, so it's not exactly impossible, but extremely unlikely. As Shark, what a name though, honestly. You wield a sword called Unbreakable, and you must defend the planet Elm from a variety of hostile invaders. It's a 2.5D game, with Shark moving along a horizontal axis while exploring 3D environments. But what makes Chain Dive so compelling is its combat. Shark also has access to a grappling hook called a plasma chain, which can be used to fling yourself around levels. While Shark's sword doesn't damage enemies, it just freezes them so you can grapple towards them. It's all just a long-winded way of saying you move fast and look cool doing it. And really, what more could you want from a video game?
見どころ満載の今日の一戦なんですが、どのあたりに注目されますか？そうですね。この試合はお互い負けるわけにはいかないですからね。そのあたり注目じゃないですか？
Any wrestling game fan worth their salt will know about Fire Pro Wrestling, the legendary 2D wrestling game that accurately depicts the art of Japanese Purusu. With 2017's Fire Pro Wrestling World being considered among the best wrestling games ever made. What you may not know is that developer Spike Chunsoft had a very brief dalliance with 3D, spawning a spin-off series called King of Colosseum. Both games in this series aim to replicate Fire Pro Wrestling in 3D, and while the first game was considered a solid if unspectacular effort, it's the sequel that earned a lot more critical acclaim, you know, despite not launching in the West. Aside from the 3D, what separated King of Colosseum and Fire Pro was the fact that Spike Chunsoft actually managed to work a deal with various Japanese companies. King of Colosseum 2 included wrestlers from promotions such as New Japan, All Japan, Pro Wrestling Noah, 01 and World Japan. It's notable because in the past Fire Pro had always used aesthetically similar yet legally distinct versions of popular wrestlers, though King of Colosseum 2 also boasted those wrestlers too if your tastes were a bit more WWE inclined. Chuck in modes like Survival Road, which actually encouraged players to structure proper wrestling matches instead of just battering your opponent in 2 minutes, and King of Colosseum 2 deserves a place amongst the best wrestling games ever made. Do you remember that part in Berserk when Han Solo and Chewbacca rocked up and tried to start a fight with Guts? Yeah, us neither. But that's maybe because the Millennium Falcon arc of the Berserk series actually has nothing to do with the Star Wars ship that it shares its name with. Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc, Chapter of the Holy Demon War, to give the game its full English translated name, is actually the second game based on Berserk to be released, with the first being Sword of the Berserk, Guts Rage for the Dreamcast. That game did receive a worldwide release, but for some reason, Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc never made it to the West. Shame. While the first game was a non-canon adventure set between volumes 22 and 23 of the manga, Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc, Chapter of the Holy Demon War was an adaptation of the events from volumes 22 to 27, with Guts on a quest to help Casca by travelling to Elfheim. Saying any more would be spoiling the sheer depravity and ugliness of the world and story that Berserk never shies away from. So consider that your warning if you've never read or watched Berserk before. As for the gameplay, the sequel boasts much more of the same sword-slashing combat you'd expect, only with bigger maps, better graphics and the addition of voice acting from the cast of the original TV series. The Sengoku Bazara series was at one point a huge part of Capcom's portfolio, at least in Japan. Loosely based on the actual events of the Sengoku period in Japan's history, Sengoku Bazara has seen over a dozen games, multiple anime and manga adaptations, and a stage play crossover with Devil May Cry. It's a pretty big series basically, and while the series did make its way to Western shores by 2010, it nearly never happened. This is because Capcom made the weird decision to change everything about the first game's aesthetic, characters and story to create a dark fantasy game that would appeal to the West. The game was called Devil Kings and hoped to tempt players by basically copying Devil May Cry's vibe. The gameplay was solid enough, as Sengoku Bazara offered the same kind of basic one versus all thrill you'd get from playing Dynasty Warriors. However, trying to appeal to Western audiences, Capcom essentially tied the noose around their own neck, and Devil Kings was a huge flop for the PS2, meaning the West missed out on everything Sengoku Bazara for a good couple of years. The sequel, Sengoku Bazara 2, added more character, story and context, and there was even an expansion release, Heroes, which offered even more players. Meanwhile, Capcom also collaborated with Arc System Works to create a fighting game, Sengoku Bazara X. All of these games skipped the rest of the world, and we can probably thank the poor reception to Devil Kings for that. This is the opposite of king shit. And that's our list. I hope you enjoyed it. Was there some games that you've played from somewhere else in the world that we do not know about? Maybe it's quite good. Let us know in the comments down below, and please, once again, like and subscribe. Ring the bell if you want to see more content from us here at Cultured Vultures. I'll see you next time.